My name is Sudhanshu Gora and I, among other things, I'm an actor, director and playwright. In fact, yesterday was a reading of my play Pagri right here at Atta Galatta. Now for those of you who might not know, TFA was established in 2004 as a public charitable trust in the memory of Angiras Toto Vellani, a young man who was passionate about music, books and films. TFA supports and encourages young people in the arts through awards, workshops, readings and other events. In February 2024, TFA will host the 20th Toto Awards. The scope of the awards has expanded over the years and now gives recognition to the work of young musicians, writers, photographers, filmmakers and digital artists. To mark this important moment and leading up to the Toto Awards next year, TFA is presenting many public events that connect with previous shortlisted and winning artists. This event today is one such effort. It forms a part of a series of rehearsed readings of plays which have won the Toto for creative writing in English. And today we present an arrangement of Shoes, the play for which Abhishek Majumdar won the Toto in 2010. Abhishek is a multiple award-winning playwright, essayist, scenographer and director who works both in India and abroad. The author of several plays, some of which have been commissioned by leading theatres of the world, such as the Royal Court Theatre London, the Prithvi in Mumbai, Rangashankara Bangalore, National Theatre London, and the San Francisco Opera, among others. Most recently, his play 9 Kinds of Silence premiered in New York in September this year. He is also the program head of theatre at New York University, Abu Dhabi. Now, this reading today of Arrangement of Shoes has been presented by theatre practitioner and educator Nisha Abdulla, who is also the artistic director of Kabila, a Bangalore theatre collective and founding member of Offstream, an artist collective that builds community around anti-caste art, history and imaginations. Nisha's strong belief in the pursuit of justice is reflected in all her work, and she does not shy away from speaking about the atrocities, violence and discrimination suffered by the disenfranchised communities in India and across the world. TFA would like to thank Atta Galatta for partnering with us to present this series of play readings. We also thank everyone associated with this reading, Sheetal Sahu handling lights and sound, and MD Pallavi for designing the poster. Ladies and gentlemen, an Arrangement of Shoes.
At 3 a.m. today, Nisar came home after 6 years. It took her 3 hours to check out of the arrival terminal. She had her suitcases checked, her clothes, and at some point of time, the lady constable frisked her so passionately that Nisar shut her eyes and imagined herself to be in the second last scene of a Hindi film, in the villain's den, just before the hero's entry, through the walls in his large motorbike. This is precisely Nisar's greatest strength. This ability to be in another time and place, when she doesn't want to be here and now. This is why Dadajan used to say that Nisar will go far. And she did, all the way to Dubai. In Dubai, she often went into Nisar mode and imagined herself to be on the sets of various films. And in a strange manner, Dadajan received them from Nisar, the cycle of our family. The arrangement of events, the arrangement of special skills, and cinematic memories. None of which frees me from my current problem, the arrangement of shoes. In the 32 years of his glorious career in the Indian Railways, he hadn't called off even a single day. On the day of his wedding with our beloved Dadi Jan, he went to office a little early, just to be able to be in time for the ceremony. He rushed through his files and barely reached in time. If Dada Jan would have delayed any longer, the Qazi would have tricked our beautiful Dadi Jan, in the prime of her youth, to marry his nephew, a supplier of wedding fountains, I'm told. Our Abbu, he was born on a Sunday, so there was no need to miss work. And since Nisar and I chose to be born precisely at office time, 9 a.m. and 9:17 a.m., Dadajan reached a little late but worked extra hours in the evening as well. The only employee of his office in recorded history to have consistently clocked 8 hours over 32 years. The government of India and of course the railways were so pleased with him, they gave him 5 promotions during his tenure. One of them was even out of turn. Dadajan had been deemed to retire as the chief assistant wedge supervisor of Barauni. Now, we didn't quite know if he was the assistant to the chiefs or the chief of the assistants, but we were told time and again that it was a remarkably critical and responsible position to hold. Dadi Jan, while she was still alive, she often told us, "Can you imagine the number of wedges used in a train? A metallic phenomenon of that scale, a locomotive giant is not made of one piece after all. It is joined at several places, here and there in nooks and crannies, and all these joints are joined by wedges that your Dadajan has ordered. Each and every one. From Kanpur to Cochin to Manipur. On all trains, it's all your Dadajan's work. And even though there have been various attempts at bribing him, not even a single box of dry fruits has come to this house on Eid or Diwali. That's how conscientious and God-fearing your Dadajan is." This, of course, led Nisar and me to believe in our childhood that conscientious people do not receive gifts and God-fearing men don't eat dry fruits. But that's another story. Nisar and me and our arrangement of beliefs. The truth remains that Dadajan was indeed God-fearing and conscientious. And also he was deeply religious. And that brings us to this thing right now. This thing about the arrangement of shoes. When they arrived in Barauni, Dadajan and Dadijan noticed that it was an already burgeoning railway colony. For the first time in about 30 years, they had been posted to a place with more than a single platform railway station. It had been Dadajan's curse of diminishing sizes. With every transfer, the town got progressively smaller. In their last few postings, the closest school had been 2 buses away. The closest dispensary was in the neighboring town. And to our Dadijan's dismay, the closest cinema hall had been in another town altogether. Very often one had to take rides from passing lorries. In her childhood, our Dadijan, she had been enamored and left spellbound by the miracle of cinema. So much so that till the age of about 30, she couldn't tell for sure if the actions on the screen were happening for real or she was just watching people pretend. Coming back to Barauni. When our Dadajan and Dadijan arrived here, like I said, it was already a burgeoning railway colony. To our Dadijan's delight, they not only received a large government quarters, but Barauni's railway colony had its own parks and a cinema hall. But our deeply religious Dadajan, however, was not impressed. He complained that although there was work and home and an office and a government quarters, there was no place to worship. Biba! It is almost disloyal to ask for a transfer so soon. But what can one do when there isn't a place of worship? Why, even in Kopargaon and Nanded, they found makeshift mosques for us. The Almighty will never forgive me for this. Perhaps I should make this difficult choice right away. Write a notice to Supervisor Sahib and ask for another transfer. Our Dadi, who never once looked into our Dadajan's eyes but ran the house nonetheless, looking away like an obedient wife, replied in third person through our Ammi. "Mamina, tell your Abba that we are not going anywhere. This place has a school, it has a playground, it has a cinema hall, everything that children need to grow. This is the largest town that we have ever been in. There is no way we are going back. There is no way we are going back to being a single platform station master's family again." Saying this, she took off her shoes. And when she took off her shoes, it meant she was staying. And so we stayed on. While Dadijan grew healthier with a daily round of walks in the park and weekly dose of Friday evening cinema, Dada Jan grew dismal by the day, to the extent that he began to pray for forgiveness. For not being able to pray, of course. But then he feared that praying in office hours might keep him from ordering the right veggies. And so he prayed for the praying to not affect the ordering of veggies. And in this arrangement of prayers, they took over his life. So much so that it is said that in the first 3 months of his posting in Barani, there were trains in the train factory, all set to roll out, except that there were no wedges to join them. The entire train-taking population went through a mini crisis when summer holidays arrived due to the lack of special trains. Now the problem hit home one day. Dadi Jan wanted us to go to Aligarh with Ammi, but it turned out that the Aligarh Express had 3 bogies less. Dadi Jan took up the matter, and again in third person through our Ammi, she made a suggestion, an order really, in disguise. Momina, ask your Abba to choose the path of service over prayer. If trains do not run as normal, the curses of the school children and their eager mothers will be hard to repeal, even after 100 trips to Makkah. Ask your Abba to do service at the Vishnu temple nearby. It's all the same anyway, as long as work gets done and the cinema is run. Hence it was decided, once and for all. And Dada Jan made his way to the temple where he was offered work at the shoe rack. After office, he made his way to the temple every evening to take care of shoes. He greeted all of them, all of the idol worshippers, as he placed these shoes on the floor, on the racks, gave them handmade coupons. He took his God's name and prayed for the bearer of the shoes. Our Dadajan never prayed for himself, but he prayed for the bearer of his service in his own way, outside the Vishnu temple, in his personal mosque. Soon enough, the trains were running again. Soon enough, Dadajan grew a beard. He worked and prayed and worked till he had his own picture of the Makkah outside the temple. And in some time, people bowed their heads here first. They took off their shoes far away from the shoe rack and covered their heads even before they entered the temple compound. Soon enough, there were 2 gods being prayed to. Double prayers. And it is still said that in those years, people of railway colony in the district of Barani received double promotions, saved double the money, and had double the children. Just like our Ammi had the 2 of us, twins, Nisar from Dubai and Rukhsar from here. Soon enough, a committee was set up, and soon enough it was decided that a mosque should be built. And so it came to be that a few years after Dada Jan and Dadi Jan arrived in Barani, they settled down with twins in the house, their daughter-in-law Momina, and remarkably, a mosque and a temple in the same compound. Dada Jan continued his service at the shoe counter. Dadi Jan continued to watch films at the cinema. Nisar and Rukhsar grew up to be teenagers with matching clothes. The trains, joined by wedges, ran normally. But how does one do this? How does one arrange shoes pulled out of a gunny sack into an arrangement from memory? Not like a new shoe in a shoe rack or in a store to be sold or rented out, but shoes kept in an arrangement that was known only to one man. How does one add another pair to it without disturbing the arrangement that already exists? How does something that makes no sense to a child suddenly reveal itself when one is older? How does reason become invalid and faith assume reason? All at the same time. How do we begin to remember those that are no longer with us? How do we arrange their story? Do we arrange their history, their memory, their photographs, or do we begin bottom up by arranging their shoes? At this point, I have to tell you, Nisar and I did not turn out to be the kind of twins that people expected us to be. Our parents never had any trouble identifying us. In fact, our Ammi is said to have told the nurse at the nursing home, "These can't be my girls. In fact, look at that one. That one definitely looks more like the woman diagonally opposite to me in the maternity ward." We were not even like the twins in cinema, where you tickle one and the other one begins to laugh. By the time we were 5 years old, Abba went to work in Qatar. A construction project employed him as a junior engineer. And we moved with our Ammi into Dada Jan and Dadi Jan's house. Abbu sent us money. Ammi kept us from killing each other. Dada Jan and Dadi Jan adored us both. But due to a fairly inconsequential time difference, Nisar was considered to be older by 17 minutes. She was taught to be more responsible, more vigilant, more consequential in her general approach to life. But little does anyone understand, besides me, that all that teaching and expectation was wasted on her. Nisar was the wilder one. She took more chances than any of us ever would. She was completely irresponsible. And she also inherited a passion that consumed a large part of our family. The love for cinema. Nisar developed a special skill for role plays, especially in times of distress. From our childhood till today, I am quite certain that Nisar has lived every major heroine. From Nargis to Kajol. Replete with details. Voice, mannerisms, clothing, and of course, shoes. When Abba was still in Kuwait, once in the week, he was allotted 7 minutes to speak to us. Abba always used up all of his 7 minutes. Since he had so many people to speak to, he did not, however, speak much to Dada Jan, except for details on how much money to be sent and how. And once a year, he came to Barani. He asked us about the presents we wanted from Qatar. Dada Jan never asked for anything, but always received tobacco of some sort. Dadi Jan always asked for a bottle of perfume, and every year she received a white bottle of Charlie. Ammi asked for nothing, but received a miscellany of creams and powders. I asked for Kit Kat chocolates, and Nisar always asked for a pair of imported shoes. See, all of this was her idea in the first place. This arrangement of shoes, this whole business begins with Nisar. And even now, she has just come back from Dubai with these shoes, and she expects me to arrange them exactly the way that our Dada Jan would like it. She expects me to absolve her of her sins. It began with her walking around the house with Ammi or Dadi Jan's shoes if they remotely resembled a film star's. Till she gradually began to cut them up into patterns and then color them. Shoes conspicuously went missing from our shoe rack, and one had an inkling of what was going on when I found them, sealed in a grey bag, behind a cupboard in our classroom. Nisar was such a fraud that sometimes I think she did not even suspect her own self. In the cinema, she would sit as if she had been forced to come for the film. Except in the interval, she went to the bathroom, took out one of the stolen shoes from her bag and put it on and walked about. She went all the way to the ticket counter and then she would return back to her seat after the interval. Sometimes I would turn around to see Nisar's face and how remarkably she could feign disinterest. The truth is that Nisar was receiving much more than intended. Nisar was learning how to act. But like the greatest of thieves and robbers, Nisar's deceit also wasn't without its weaknesses. She too had habits that gave her away. In the classroom and in the cinema, her left nostril developed a small twitch whenever she would have to battle with her guilt. An untrained eye was sure to miss it, but many siblings know that we can catch each other red-handed, often even before the other one had committed the act. Which is why I noticed her left nostril twitch at home for the first time when Dadi Jan insisted that the two of us should go and see Dada Jan's shoe-keeping booth and help him out with his service. Nisar agreed as usual, like she did to every other instruction. But this time, she agreed with a twitch of her nostril. And then it came back again and again and again, several times in a month. Her attempts at helping Dada Jan, his absolute love for her values, and the twitch in her nostrils. Around the same time, Dada Jan began to look worried. Around the same time, the gunny sack behind our cupboard in school swelled up. And around the same time, Dadi Jan predicted that a young boy from TV serials would be the next superstar in Hindi cinema. At dinner one night, Dada Jan said, "There's something worrying me, Biba. Someone is stealing shoes from the racks and people are beginning to keep count." Ammi was relieved to know that Dada Jan hadn't found out about Abba's posting in Kuwait as yet. Annoyed by his little problems as compared to her own, and also relieved at the same time, Ammi said, "There have been thefts all along, Abba Jan. Besides, you are neither there the whole day, nor would anyone ever point a finger at you. In this little time that you've earned for yourself this position of an extremely honorable man." Next to me, I could sense Nisar tensing up. When I turned towards her, there it was, the twitch of her nostril. "It's not the theft, it's the counting I'm worried about. Since the mosque and the temple goers keep their shoes in the same rack, someone tried to count the loss of Hindu slippers against the Muslim ones. I don't know where the idea had its seed, but fortunately the number of Muslims who lost slippers far outnumbered the Hindus. If it were the other way around, I would probably have explanations to provide. This isn't a good sign, Momina." Ammi looked worried as well. Dadi Jan went silent and a gloom set on the table. The news was blaring on the TV and it wasn't really helping, this news of the war. I turned to Nisar and I counted the number of times she twitched her nostril over dinner. I still remember the number, 43. At 44, Ammi noticed it as well. "Stop doing that thing, whatever you're doing." Nisar, who till then had no clue about this habit of hers, stopped immediately, and I was robbed of her last weakness. She looked at me, as if to point out my treachery for not telling her before. But just then the news showed some figures, some more counting about number of Americans killed versus the number of Iraqis, 4 against 176, I still remember. And I imagined these remarkable American soldiers, strong, able-bodied, with better machines, who could kill 40 lame Iraqis. Quick math. What are the chances that Americans will win the war? 1:40. I felt happy. But what are the chances that Abu will survive the onslaught on Kuwait? 40:1. I was worried. Unless of course, the American soldiers knew who they were shooting. So then what are the chances that the giant high-tech American soldier would come face to face with my Abba and let him go, or airdrop him into our house from some helicopter as soon as he found out that he was our Abba. In spite of his Muslim name and his beard, he was our Abba. Here from Barani, not from Iraq. What were the chances? 1:40? 40:1? I didn't know. I was puzzled. Just then Dadajan took his eyes off the TV and asked Ammi, Momina, how far is Qatar from Kuwait? Very far, almost 3 nights. Ammi didn't actually know. Okay. Next time he calls, ask him to speak to me. It's about time he got back home. We no longer need his tobacco and his perfumes. Just then, Nisar made half a twitch and stopped. Self-aware as always. Nisar was worried about her shoes, imported, and also about not giving her tell away. That night, Ammi came very late into bed. After dinner, she took her ball of wool, placed a chair outside the door and sat down to knit a sweater, as if her life depended on it. In peak summer, she knitted the sweater as if it had to be ready before dawn. Our Ammi had this habit when faced with a problem she could do absolutely nothing about. She tried to solve its most fundamental nature remotely. That night after the discussion and the news, she decided to make Abba's life comfortable. Somehow, anyhow. She decided to knit a sweater for him. If it were cold in Kuwait, the knitting of the sweater might keep him warm. And if not, he could take it off and keep it for the winters. This hypothetical, long-distance sweater. It runs in the family, this delusional behavior. It's difficult to judge this arrangement of delusions. In the room inside, I heard Nisar sob in bed. She knew, I knew. I knew, she knew, I knew. And she and I knew that we both knew, but we hadn't said a thing. How did you manage that? I asked in a whisper. Managed what? This whole business of shoes, how did you manage to steal more of the Muslims than that of the Hindus? I don't know, it just happened. Traitor! It turned the other way around. Then I heard her mumble something again and I turned back. What? But I don't know about the ones today. I stole another 5 pairs this afternoon. Well done. I went off to sleep. Perhaps early morning, I heard Ammi enter the room. She sat between the two of us, caressed our hair, took some more wool from the almara and left. The full sweater was done. She was starting on another half. Next day, after school, Nisar and I sailed out of the bathroom where we were hiding till then. We took out our gunny sack, full of shoes, from behind the cupboard and decided it would be safest to place them back 5 at a time. Will you help me? She asked for asking's sake. I denied for denying's sake. I've always done Nisar's dirty work, like I'm doing right now. We hid the shoes in our bags and made our way to the temple compound. Dadajan would not be out of office till at least 5, and before he came in, we would place the shoes back. Even if they were unclaimed for a day or two, sooner or later they would find their way back to their rightful feet. It did happen as planned. We reached the compound, went into the shoe rack, and as soon as it was vacant, Nisar and I placed the 5 shoes back on the rack. We rushed back home overjoyed till dinner time, but Dadajan looked even more worried this time. Someone is messing with my service, Biba. Someone is messing with my arrangement of shoes. It's not that it is missing, Biba. but something even more serious. I pray with my shoes, Biba. People ask me to pray for them, and I know which shoe is kept with which prayer, and whose feet bear the soles of whose sins, which Hindu's prayers are sitting in which Musalman's shoe rack, and which Khan Sahib's daughter's marriage is resting on which Sharma's feet. I pray in service, Biba, just like you had said. Not only for myself, but for everyone who asks me to. Now I see my prayers stolen and arranged in a way that I can't tell one from the other. The prayers, Biba, that's why they have me there. If that goes wrong, everything will collapse. The temple, the mosque, everything. Dadi Jan, as usual, wrote Dada Jan off. In third person, she told him again, Nisar, Rukhsar, beta, tell your Dada Jan that he is too old for fantasies and too young to turn senile. Prayers are prayers and shoes are shoes. It's their numbers which count, not their arrangement. Also, ask your Dada Jan to pray for your Abba's health and for him to return soon if his prayers have suddenly developed some big power. Don't waste it on some public demand. Dadi Jan was upset. Dada Jan nervously finished his food and Ammi skipped the whole discussion altogether to tend to her socks. Nisar and I lay in bed trying to understand what Dada Jan's arrangement was. At the end of it all, we decided we should try again the next day. But instead of placing the shoes on the rack, we would just keep them back on the counter. Let the arranger arrange it himself. We would return the prayers with thanks. Hindu or Muslim, all Nisar cared about was looking good. Thanks, but no thanks. We didn't need their shoes or their prayers. Although completely different, we did have an arrangement of agreements. Nisar and me, separated by 17 minutes, the shoe stealer, street smart fraud, and her sister, the ad hoc confidant, the partner in crime, and the part-time arranger of shoes. The following Friday was the first of many Fridays when Ammi would leave the cinema by half-time. In a way, Ammi had just lost patience to watch a long plot reveal itself. She no longer cared about the car chase or the scene where the hero's mother sings for her son's safety. None of that seemed to matter anymore. Interval and Ammi would just get up from her seat and leave. No bye-byes, no questions, no answers. She would just leave. She didn't expect us to follow her. We didn't expect her to expect us. The cyclicity of our family. An arrangement of expectations. By then, the news of the Gulf War had become regular phenomenon, and the count of Allied soldiers to Iraqis read something like 4:900. One remained constant, while the other went past the roof. Nisar and I were pleased to know that the Americans were sending even stronger men with even better guns, like the ones we had seen in the posters of the English movies at the cinemas. The ones we weren't allowed to watch. A quick math confused us though. 1:225 seemed like an unbelievable odd. And if it worked in our favor, then Abba should have been home by now. And if not, he probably wasn't ever going to. It became crucial for us to gauge the American soldier's IQ, the odds of his powers of deduction. The following Friday, Ammi came out of the cinema hall a little before interval, and she found Dada Jan at the ticket counter, buying a show for the Saturday matinee. Dada Jan was caught red-handed. Not too shameful an act if you ask me, but he stood there, staring at Ammi, followed by a blank smile. Ammi and Dadajan became the best of friends. Ammi soon came to know that Dadajan secretly collected cinema tickets, and his only desire for himself was to make a collage from the tickets. The only idol he would ever worship was that of his collage of memories from the cinema. His only betrayal to the rules of his God. After 6 days of work, service and family, Dadajan fancied his Hindi film once a week. He collected those tickets like nothing else that he ever collected. His arrangement of tickets was as precious as his arrangement of shoes. His passion for his sin was as absorbing as his arrangement of faith. All he ever wanted for himself was to make a collage of cinema tickets and send it to the newspaper for just one day. Momina, I want to be in the papers as someone who ordered wedges for trains and made a train-shaped collage of cinema tickets. That's all he ever wanted. A photo and a train-shaped collage. Dadajan's collection of tickets grew week after week, arranged itself in a train-shaped collage, with each ticket being the wedge of a train, each a sin, a half-secret, a bit of pleasure mixed into service and work. Ammi kept Dadajan's secret, and both of them met outside the cinema on Saturday afternoons, and they went out, buying things for the house while discussing Abba's return, the growing up of young girls, the importance of wedges, and of course, the arrangement of shoes. Speaking of shoes, Dadajan was still absorbed in finding out about the theft. It doesn't take much to start things, Momina. I don't mind if someone poor or helpless is stealing the shoes as long as he steals from the right religion. Nisar and Rukhsar, his granddaughters, had stolen parts of his only major service with their little sin. One night, Dadajan dreamt of giant soldiers. Soldiers who were dragging him out of his shoe counter in the temple compound. He woke up choking and coughing out of his dream. He woke up only to realize that a betel nut had got stuck in his throat. And just as Dadajan struggled with the betel nut in his throat, Abba saw a light shine over his head, standing in an open parking lot in Kuwait. In no time, he struggled under the rubble of a collapsed building, with a friend's family crushed by his side. As Dadajan gulped down glass after glass, Abba saw light after light till his last finger moved. And just as Dadajan didn't know which glass of water, which one exactly drowned the nut, no one knows what it was exactly that killed Abba that night in Kuwait. Was it fear? Was it the rubble? Was it the first missile, the second or the third, maybe the fourth, the fifth? No one knows. It can only be deduced that they fired long after he was dead for the same reason that Dadajan drank long after the nut had been swallowed. Safety. Certainty. Better odds. One is to 225. 225 is to 1. The odds did not work for us. Such was the arrangement of events. Such was the arrangement of odds. There is only 2 ways to deal with death. With continuous activity, and total silence, or by behaving like nothing has ever happened. Our household chose the latter. Abba never arrived. Only his bag did. We didn't bury him. But symbolically, we buried his belongings, his and ours, that he brought for us. The tobacco, the perfumes, the cream, the Kit Kats, the imported shoe, the last one that Nisar would ever own. He became part of folklore in the railway colony, the man who fought Americans to death, the man who had joined the CIA, the man who died saving Kuwait's single central railway water station from a mile-long missile. And these were just the more believable stories going around. Our family had turned famous overnight because nothing of this scale had ever happened in a railway colony before. But no matter how much one tries to keep things as they were, the death of a loved one creates dead cells. Dead cells in one's body and brains. Dead holes in one's soul. Dead minutes. Dead seconds. Dead cells when one completely blanks out of normalcy. In our house, it developed in all of us, this malignant dead cell, the result of a single death. In small ways, each one of us, we obsessed with keeping it going, to replace Abba with some obsession, with something more tangible. Dadi Jaan began to walk, day in and day out. She looked for signs of her lost son in a place where he never lived. She looked for Aligarh in our railway colony, for Kuwait and Qatar right there in Barauni. She felt cheated, robbed of the opportunity to mourn him, leave alone bury him, or to be buried by him. She felt cheated by the lack of memories this place offered, and she oscillated between being a mother looking for her son to being a daughter looking for her father. She started to look straight into the eyes of men. She watched TV as if it would tell her something she didn't know. At other times she walked and walked. She did all the household that involved going out herself, things she hadn't done in more than 50 years. Like a child who had learnt recently to walk or cycle or speak, she just couldn't stop. She walked in the morning to the milk booth, she walked in the markets to buy and bargain, she walked to post office to buy stamps and envelopes for letters she could never write, she walked to banks to update her passbook without withdrawing or depositing money, just like that, sometimes several times a week. She deluded herself with her walk. And she stared at her toes every night. As if they were going to wear away. As if she had dared the powers that be to wear her away, bottom up. Dadi Jaan did not care about her soul anymore. She just wanted to use up her body. But she did not give up her love for cinema. Every Friday, she walked to the cinema. She walked inside the hall at intervals, and while watching the film, her legs shook continuously. Her toes continuously moved. She could no longer tell one film from the other. She consumed them. She ate them up. She walked into her movies and they ran into her. On one Friday evening, while I was watching a film, I was observing her toes, while Nisar was observing her face. Her toes were moving, and the film was shining on her face. Nisar and I, we switched gazes, and I looked at her face going paler, while Nisar noticed her slippers slipping out of her toes. We switched gazes again. And this time, Nisar saw Dadi Jaan's lips dry up, her heavy chest, it swelled and then collapsed, and I saw her feet reach the finishing line. The next time we switched gazes, our gazes met midway. And at the happiest, funniest point of the film, when the entire hall burst out laughing, Dadi Jaan walked herself to the middle of a city on fire. She had met her son and her father. In a happy cinema hall on a happy Friday evening, 3 months after Abba's death, Dadi Jaan met a happy end. She had walked herself to a larger town, with hopefully more parks and many more cinema halls. Two is to 6, Nisar calculated. The odds are still in our favor. There's good chances that our family will survive. I was still looking for signs of nervousness from Nisar, now that the had completely stopped. She was a nervous oracle, one that calculated backwards. Her delusion kept her going. The math wasn't for me, it was for herself. Nisar was telling herself all along that we would survive and was looking for signs of survival from my face. This has always been Nisar's only major expectation from me. She needed me to approve. Our arrangement of approvals. Coming back to the shoes, Nisar became a compulsive shoe stealer. It kept her going. That was her obsession. She stole from anywhere and everywhere. She began to fill gunny sack after gunny sack with shoes. But when she wasn't stealing shoes, she was quite reasonable, really. Ammi, Dada Jaan and the teachers at school were always proud of Nisar. And the comparisons became so ominous that I had an urge quite a few times to scream out that for all my ordinariness, at least I wasn't a petty shoe stealer. She no longer cared about the faith behind the shoes, but Dada Jaan was losing sleep over it every night. A couple of times he tried to resign from his post of the resident shoekeeper out of sheer panic, but people would have none of it. They treated it as a sort of greater good, to keep this infidel, childless, spouseless man occupied. And as it had now turned out, he had turned into the subject of their service rather than providing his own. He was the burden, and they were the ones filling up points in the cosmic math of formidable deeds. Just like Nisar, they were all nervous oracles, and I concluded at age 15 that growing up came with being nervous. Nisar agreed, but she preferred delusion. Rukhsar, cinema and mathematics. Grown-ups indulge in both, in high quantities, just to get over their nervousness. An arrangement of age, 17 minutes apart. As the problem with the shoes escalated, a committee was set up. And there were indeed a few tangential questions asked about this business of late of losing more Hindu shoes than Muslim ones. The nervous oracle was running out of both family and luck. For no real reason, for about 2 to 3 weeks, all the shoes that Nisar had stolen belonged to the feet that walked to the temple. And there was no other mathematics that accounted for this coincidence. A gunny sack full of hidden Hindu slippers, while the Muslim ones lay intact on the rack. Dada Jaan was beginning to tire of the whole thing. He stood up on a Friday meeting and made a failing case for separating the racks. Separate ones for the temple and separate ones for the mosque. But it seemed blasphemous to the committee. Someone obliquely advised Dada Jaan on the importance of service over faith. Dada Jaan got up from the room and left. He walked back home, bare feet, his shoes still sitting on the rack. The only ones without a prayer. On returning home, he locked himself up in a room. For weeks, he didn't step out till a notice of absence arrived from his office. The wedges department faced the same problem again after all these years. That of trains waiting to be wedged. After 37 years of non-stop attendance, our Dada Jan was removed for absence, both from the railways and the temple and the mosque committee. He walked back to his office to clear his table and from behind a cupboard left with a hidden, half-done collage. On reaching the shoe rack, however, he couldn't find his shoe. By then, Nisar had stolen both his service and his shoes. He returned barefoot again. He sat down on his unrocking chair. Till last week, our Dadajan sat here on this unrocking chair and completed his collage. Just about in time. He never sent it to the papers though. And in his lifetime, his photograph never appeared. Only on his identity card. After Dadajan was removed, Ammi and him had all the time in the world. We moved out of Barauni to go to the biggest city that our Dadijan had ever seen, Delhi. Not because we loved it, but because we had nowhere else to go. Dadajan made his collage of film tickets. Ammi worked in a small office while we grew up in this large city. Nisar was never caught stealing shoes and Rukhsar never gave it away. Later, Nisar went to Dubai to become a nurse. With her stolen shoes hidden in her bags and suitcases, only to realize that nurses wear only one kind of shoe. Dadajan died last week. Ammi decided to bury his things as well, along with Abba's. Everything he ever owned. Except, of course, for his collage, his work of art. That was going to stay. On arranging his life, beginning with his first posting, to his wedding with our Dadijan, to children and grandchildren, everything had been arranged in order. Except, of course, for that one thing, Dadajan's shoes. The one that he left behind, the shoe that Nisar stole from the racks. Nisar decided to return all the shoes. She didn't know which one is Dada's anymore, but she had to find the arrangement again. So she did a math. What are the chances that she will find Dadajan's shoes? After so many years from a pile of them, what are the chances that she will say the right prayers when there are so many prayers to pick from? Her nervous oracle is nervous again, and this is where I, her sister, younger by 17 minutes, need to step in. To arrange life, to arrange shoes, memories, not in any order of chance, but in an order of what I remember. And how I remember it. I don't remember the shoe, but I remember Dadajan's feet. I remember the balls of his toes, and hopefully I will find the one that needs to be buried with his things. But if not, we'll bury them all. His prayers and other people's, and his shoes and other people's shoes. A prayer each for Abba, Dadijan, Dadajan, and the rest of us. From Nisar and from me. A week after Dadajan had already died, the nervous oracle asked me in her car, on the way back from the airport, what are the chances that things will ever happen here? I could see it in her eyes, new, fresh eyes. She was looking at familiar streets in an unfamiliar way. I could see that she did not know what to feel about returning home after years and years of staying away. She was nervous and she asked me, what had been happening here all this while? Have things moved at all or have they remained the same? The temple and the mosque are still in Barani, I said. So they have separate shoe racks now. Abbas company is reconstructing Iraq, although this time it's after another war, by the same name. People in the railway colony, I have heard, have received double payments after the last pay commission. And apparently 3 pairs of twins have been born. There is now a bench on Dadajan's name in the temple compound. And since last year, Ammi is receiving his pension. Just yesterday in the local newspaper, in Barani, Dadajan's photograph finally appeared in the obituary column. Some well-wishers had placed it of their own accord, thanking him for his silent prayers. Rukhsar, what are the chances that I will stay back? Here in this hole, in this city, which is not even ours. I don't know, Nisar. I can't decide that for you. I can't tell you what to do. I can, however, help you find Dadajan's shoes. Everyone for being here today. There are lots of things you can do with your Saturday evening. So the fact that you're here enjoying an evening of theatre means a lot. So thank you very much. Sarita, do you want to take over from here?
No.
Okay, so we have the playwright
Yes, please.
with us today, and this is where we can probably do a round of questions.
I'll represent.
Okay, thank you.
This is
Abhishek.
so this is where we can do a round of questions, if any of you.
Yes, thank you for coming, and thank you to PFA for organizing this, and to Nisha for doing this. Yes, if there's any questions.
Abhishek, I just want to ask you that you wrote this about 13 years ago. Now, listening to it now, how do you react to your own work? I mean, you probably haven't read it for I don't know how many years, looked at it again. So how does it come across to you?
I mean, it was firstly very useful for me because I'm starting a very new journey with this work. I'm now writing a novel, a full novel based on arrangement of shoes. And I didn't think of that earlier, but I don't know if you or Sarita or somebody had suggested this to me many years ago, and I hadn't actually thought of that. I found it overwritten already, which is scary if you're trying to think of a monologue as a novel and you find the monologue overwritten. But it was it was nice to hear it. You know, I haven't heard it in many years. Yeah.
Yeah, I also felt it was a bit dense listening to it after a long time. You know, too many things colliding with each other.
Yeah, I think and it seems that places it needs some space, which I felt so.
Thank you everyone. Thank you Atta Galatta, Nisha, where is
Sheetal.
Sheetal, and of course our playwright
Thank you.
who surprised us.